Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Real Show, to our 18th episode. So, in celebration of this anniversary, we've brought along a very special guest, none other than producer, director, writer, and voice actor, Mr. Nicholas Briggs. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
For many people who listen to the show, they might not be too familiar with your work. So, how would you best describe yourself?
Well, some people might know me because of my voice work on Doctor Who. I'm the voice of the Daleks and the Cybermen and other monsters. So that's been a job I've had since, we filmed the first one in 2004 and it was out on the telly in 2005. But my day job really is I'm the creative director of Big Finish Productions, and Big Finish Productions have a license from the BBC to do Doctor Who audio drama with all the old Doctor Who's and some of the new ones. We've just done some with Christopher Eccleston. They're not out yet, but I've been directing some of those and acting in some of those. We also do loads of other stuff at Big Finish. Jerry Anderson stuff, Space 1999 and Terrorhawks, and we do... just go to bigfinish.com and have a look. Also, we were hoping to have a chap called Benji Clifford here, who's one of my colleagues at Big Finish, but Benji and I do a weekly podcast called The Benji and Nick Show, where we talk about vintage television and have a bit of a laugh. And one of the main reasons I'm here today is to plug that. So, yeah, that's me. What do you reckon?
That's great. You can plug whatever you like. It's our show.
Okay.
If you feel the need to plug anything, just go ahead. We plug enough.
Yeah, I'll just leap in with some plugging.
Yeah,
Don't forget,
that sounds
the
great.
Benji and Nick Show on all your podcast apps.
Thank you. So let's get started. Let's get started with talking about Big Finish, if that's okay.
Yeah.
How did you sort of get involved with them from obviously your voice work up to now, up to being the creative director and exec producer at Big Finish, and even writing and directing some features yourself?
Yeah. Well, okay. The way it went is this. I've been a Doctor Who fan since as long as I can remember. I was technically born before Doctor Who started, but I wasn't really old enough to watch it until I watched it from about the last series of William Hartnell. Yep, that's how old I am. So I remember all that stuff. It's and things like Evil of the Daleks no longer in the BBC archive, and yet I remember seeing it twice as a kid. If only we could somehow capture those signals that got through my eyes and into my brain. I don't want to put ideas into the heads of mad scientists listening. Anyway, so yes, massively into Doctor Who. Spent loads of my childhood writing Doctor Who stories incessantly, even doing Doctor Who audio plays, funnily enough, on my own with a tape recorder at home. Using the broken wheelbarrow as the sound of the TARDIS because it made a grinding noise. Then, for various reasons that are too dull to go into, I decided that I was probably going to be an actor. So I ended up going to drama school at a time when it was much easier to go to drama school than it is now. I don't mean because of lockdown, but because in those days, if you were lucky, you could get a grant to go to drama school. So you didn't have to be a rich kid. You didn't have to, have parents who lived in a stately home or whatever, or have gone to Oxbridge. You could just be your bog standard everyday sort of person, and Hampshire County Council gave me a grant to go to Rose Bruford College, which is also, it turned out, the college where Tom Baker went. I believe he got chucked out after a year for being naughty. And I went there and I got a degree in theatre arts and did a drama training there, and had a fantastic time. Worked with all sorts of great people, but really fell off a cliff at the end of it, metaphorically speaking. Rose Bruford is in Kent. It's not on the end of a cliff. So signing on, looking for something to do with my life, I got in with a bunch of Doctor Who fans back near my hometown, because I'm from the sort of Southampton area. I was born in Lyndhurst, where my mother still lives. And a friend of mine called Nicholas Layton, who I'd been school friends with since about the age of 11, who, to me, was the only other Doctor Who fan in the world. And up until meeting him when I was 11, I didn't think there were other Doctor Who fans. And he was assigned to look after me when I went to the school, because I was the new boy from a different area. And, when he mentioned that he liked Doctor Who, up until then, when I'd mentioned Doctor Who, people had only ever said, this is 1974, people had only ever said, oh, that's rubbish, that is. So he was the first person who ever said to me, God, I love Doctor Who. So anyway, Nick got in with a bunch of Doctor Who fans in the Southampton area. As part of their local group of the Doctor Who Appreciation Society, they started doing Doctor Who audio plays. Their only problem was they couldn't find anyone who was any good at being the Doctor. And then my friend Nick said to them, my friend Nick has just left drama school and he's an actor. And so they got me in to play the Doctor. But in the process, of course, I started saying these scripts are rubbish. And so I was basically told, well, why don't you write one then? So I did, because I'd been writing all my life up until then, as a kid. And at drama school, I'd been writing all sorts of plays and trying to write, I had so many first chapters of novels that never went anywhere. That's the big challenge with writing, actually finishing something. Once you've got that beat, then you're okay, as long as it's any good, of course. So I got involved with doing stuff for a group of fans that called themselves Audio Visuals. And I wasted at least 4 years, possibly more, of my life doing that. Of course, I didn't waste it because I learned really vital lessons about storytelling and production and how to make audio drama, really, in a way that eventually, when Big Finish came about, because a friend of mine who worked on these audio visuals plays was Gary Russell, who you might know if you're a Doctor Who fan. He's a former editor of Doctor Who magazine, a writer of Doctor Who books, and latterly a script editor on Doctor Who and related things at BBC Wales. He said to me, wouldn't it be lovely if one day we could do this properly as a job? We get a license from the BBC and get proper Doctor Who's, not you, Nick Briggs. So he didn't say it like that at all. He's a very nice man. And so that one day happened because he managed to get an old school friend of his, Jason Haig-Ellery, who was a businessman by now, running very successful businesses, to put some money behind it. Jason's also a massive Doctor Who fan, we're firm friends, Jason and I, known each other for years. So Jason went to the BBC and tried to get a license for Doctor Who, and the BBC turned him down. But we went away and made Bernice Summerfield audios. Bernice Summerfield was a character in some books, some Doctor Who books, and then they spun her off into her own series when Virgin Publishing, who published those books, lost their license. So we did Bernice Summerfield audios kind of to prove to the BBC, look, we can do this really well. A couple of years later, we went to the BBC and said, look, I say we, I mean Jason and Gary, really, went to the BBC and said, look, we can do this. And by this time, they were much more open to the idea of an outside company doing audios because, believe it or not, Doctor Who was totally dead at that time. No one, they'd had the 1996 relaunch with Paul McGann in a TV movie filmed in Canada, made by an American company, Fox, I think. And although it had done very well viewing figures wise in this country, it flopped in America. So they didn't make a series. The BBC had expected there to be a new big series, which is why they hadn't given us the license in the first place. Now, a couple of years later, they could see there was nothing in Doctor Who. So we started doing Doctor Who audio drama. We got the license. And the interesting thing for me is that, when we made the first one, we gave a CD of it because it was only on CD or cassette in those days. No such thing as downloads. We gave a CD to the BBC to listen to it, to check and say if it was okay. And they did. They said yes. Then, of course, the next month we went back to them with the next one. And they said, well, we've already listened to it. And we said, no, that was the last one. This is a new one. They said, what, another one? Or can we just say we've listened to it? So that's a big difference to where the BBC works now, where, of course, it's a big, exciting international brand and the BBC check everything we do. But back in those days, they were kind of like, yeah, whatever. It was just like one person dealing with it, really. So it grew and grew and grew and built and became very successful with Gary Russell being the producer. And then round about the time Doctor Who came back, this is a very long answer, isn't it? Do jump in at any point.
Oh, no, it's all right. I'm letting you riff.
Thank you. And when the TV series came back, just the news of the TV series coming back nearly destroyed Big Finish because all the Doctor Who fans just went, oh, right, we've had that Doctor Who. Let's have proper Doctor Who now. So Gary Russell then moved on. I think he felt that he was exhausted, and also the fact that Big Finish wasn't the only horse in town anymore. I don't know whether that's an actual metaphor, but I've just made it up. And I don't know how many horses you have in a town, really. I think the specialness of it was gone for Gary. So I threw my hat into the ring saying, well, I'll take over. And rather suspecting that I'd be rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic for a couple of years before, Big Finish finally died a death because being eclipsed by the TV series. But through the industry of so many of my colleagues and friends, and hopefully something to do with me as well, particularly I'm thinking of people like Alan Barnes, who's the script editor, and Barnaby Edwards, who did a lot of directing, writing and casting directing. And then about a year on into David Richardson, who's still the senior line producer at Big Finish. We created as many interesting, as it were, tentpole releases, that stuck out to bring people back to Big Finish. And little by little, they came trickling back. And, things have really took off. And so that's where we are. I mean, I wrote and directed and did the sound design and music for the first ever Big Finish release, and have continued dabbling in that side of it with the writing as well. But mainly my job is to oversee the creative output of Big Finish now for all its ranges, not just Doctor Who.
Yeah.
I'm gonna lie down now.
Okay. Well,
did I tell you anything you didn't know there?
Yes, you did. Well, I've been a big fan of Big Finish since things like the Apocalypse element and the War Doctor stories. Yeah. So I think it's almost told like, I've listened to audiobooks and stuff like that, but with Big Finish, there's something very intuitive and very special. It's told like a book with there's sound effects, there's voice acting.
Yes.
Full there's cast. There's stories being told. You can really just close your eyes and just get into it. You can really visualize it as a Doctor Who story or a Sherlock Holmes story or something from something like Terrorhawks or things like that. There's a very wide range, but yes, it's very cool to sort of know the origins of obviously your role in Big Finish, not just as a voice actor but also as a creative director and overseeing things like that.
Well, of course, along the way, because of my work on Big Finish, and very early on, I said to Gary Russell, because we didn't get the rights to the Daleks straight away. When we were starting out with our first story, Jason and Gary said to me, well, first of all, Gary told me that I couldn't write for it because I wasn't one of the BBC Books Doctor Who writers. He said they only want those writers. And in those days, Gary and I used to live about 5 minutes walk from each other's flats. So off he went back to his flat. By the time he got back, I'd already thought of a story I could do, even though he told me I couldn't write it. And then he phoned me up and said, look, I've been thinking about it and we want to keep this thing secret. And if we get another writer in, it's going to leak. So maybe we could get you to write the first one. I said, that's all right, because I've come up with an idea already. He said, I knew you would have done anyway. So, but my very first idea was to do a Dalek story. And they said, we can't because we don't have the rights yet. We haven't negotiated those. So when we did finally get the Dalek rights, I said to Gary Russell, since for the audiovisual stuff, I'd not only been playing the Doctor, I'd also been doing the Dalek voices. I basically said to him, these are more or less the exact words I said to him. I said, can I do the Dalek voices for Big Finish, or do you want to see a grown man cry? And he said, yeah, it's all right then. So I ended up doing the Dalek voices for Big Finish. And this was, a moment of coincidence, really, where Russell T Davies, who listened to Big Finish, started to hear me doing Dalek voices. So when it came round, and then at some point during it all, Clayton Hickman, who was one of the editors of Doctor Who magazine, asked me to write an article about how to do a Dalek voice, or the technical side of it as well. And of course, Russell T Davies, big reader of Doctor Who magazine. So Russell had not only heard me do a Dalek voice, he'd also read an article which proved that I knew all about how to do it, nuts and bolts, technically. So when the TV series came back, he just thought, we don't have a radiophonic workshop and this guy can do it. There's our total solution. So that's, how I got the job, really. And there's a whole story about how a bunch of people I knew were at a sort of branding pre-production meeting where they told all the licensees what the new Doctor Who was going to be like. And they showed a picture of a Dalek and everything. And Clayton Hickman put his hand up and said, if you're doing the Daleks, will Nick Briggs be doing the voices? And Russell said, yes, but don't tell him yet because we haven't spoken to his agent. After which, 3 people from that meeting secretly phoned me and told me, whilst telling me not to tell anyone, that they'd told me that Russell T Davies had said all this. So I was in a position where I was waiting for about 3 months going through all sorts of agonies, thinking, is it true? Oh, God, they'll get someone famous to do it. They won't get me. And then I got that job, which, has changed my life beyond all recognition. Suddenly I was able to go into Sainsbury's and not calculate how many grams something was as opposed to the price to see which was the best bargain. I could just buy what I wanted. That's my definition of success. I could I could be in a supermarket. Yeah, I could be in a supermarket without sweating about getting to the checkout and having to embarrassingly hand back some of the items because I'd run out of money, which had happened before in the past, because I lived on a very meager wage. So, it took some tension out of my life. And of course, the brilliant thing about being the voice of the Daleks is that for a large number of people, it's a thing, isn't it? If someone says to you, what do you do? And you say, well, I'm the voice of the Daleks, most people, although hilariously, a significant number of people don't react, but most people go, wow, that's incredible. Oh, do the voice and all that kind of. It's a lovely thing to do. Although it's a lovely grounding moment when you speak to someone who was brought up in a territory that didn't have Doctor Who, and you say, I'm the voice of the Daleks in Doctor Who, and it's like you've just said to them, I'm the bibbly bibbly bum and the bubbly bubbly boo, and they've got, what do any of those words mean? I've invariably presented it as a rather proud fact, and they're looking at me like, I don't know what that is. So those moments put me in my place. But so it's glorious, really. And as I keep saying, almost, I would say not a week goes past when I don't thank, not to his face, but quite often I do in an email to his face, thank Russell T Davies for what he did there, because he did totally change my life.
Yeah, and it's now sort of, especially the Dalek voice has spawned into so many other sort of things. It's there's obviously been the new sort of paradigm Daleks, the Emperor, the Daleks from there was something in 2020. Was it just called Daleks? I think it was. It was that the 5-episode sort of animated series in 2020.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes. Daleks ! Yes.
Daleks ! Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, Daleks ! Obviously the Dalek Time Controller from Big Finish was my personal favourite, but and obviously there's thousands of other, like the Bronze Time War Daleks that you do amazingly. You have to do quite a bit of hectoring. It's quite
that's what
you have to really give it some gusto. So
well, there's always a challenge, in every script there's always a challenge for a different type of Dalek or a different approach, and that's always, I'm really happy with the bog standard exterminate and we obey and all that kind of thing. I love all that. It's great fun to do. But it's lovely that they're, like we've had Dalek Khan, and the first Dalek in the TV series, was this sort of wounded creature that people actually felt sorry for, but which they shouldn't have done because, of course, it was very nasty, actually. But there's always a challenge, and that's delightful. And I'm really lucky that each new showrunner that comes along, they inherit me, and they think, oh well, yeah, he's the Dalek guy. Luckily none of them yet have gone, yeah, well, he may have been the Dalek guy up until last Wednesday, but now my mate Bert's gonna do it because he's got a kazoo for a mouth or whatever. But I'm very lucky. And Chris Chibnall is delightful. He actually, entirely coincidentally, lives just up the road from me. I'm pointing out of my window I can just not quite see his house because the houses curve away slightly. But so when we speak on the phone, he always says, "Hello, neighbour."
See, now, this brings me on to my next thing. Obviously, like you mentioned, you're the voice of the Daleks. However, very, very well, I guess famously, every single Dalek, especially like the different variations, always sound but like tiny bit different, whether it's a bit higher pitched, bit lower pitched, bit deeper, etc. How important is it to you that like if they're like, okay, we're bringing in a new Dalek, it's a new type of Dalek, how important is it to you that one, they sound different, but also is it a fun kind of process to make the new voices, or is it now becoming more maybe difficult and that sort of thing?
No, I don't think it ever becomes difficult because I just have such joy for it. But yeah, it is really important that they sound different, and it's fun to experiment with different ways of doing it. For the latest special that was on New Year's Day, there were these other Daleks, the sort of security drone Daleks, and I just I did ask the director about it, but he didn't seem to have much input. And I spoke to Chris about it on the phone while I was filming it. And I said, well, I've got an idea for what I'd like to do. He said, well, just offer that up. And if we don't like it, we can always change it. You can change it in post-production, you know. So I did, you know, on the set, I actually altered the setting on the ring modulator, which I very rarely do. I mostly make vocal changes just with the way I shape my mouth or, you know. That's the sort of the John Pertwee way of changing voices. He always said that about doing different character voices. You know, have your mouth, you put it into a different shape and a different kind of voice comes out. You're changing the you know, the resonance of your voice by altering the shape of your mouth. So I usually do that, but I just thought it would be fun to make these, because they were a sort of airsats Daleks in a way, weren't they? They were Daleks created by a different means, created as security drones, and then of course the Dalek creatures subverted all that and, you know, got creatures inside. So I wanted them to sound sort of like a sort of lighter kind of technology, really. Not because they're not so big and beefy, so I just increased the rate of the ring modulation. A lot of people are saying, oh, they're like Remembrance of the Daleks. Well, they're like the Remembrance of the Daleks, the Sylvester McCoy story, when they were on location, but you notice in the studio sections, I'm getting very nerdy now, of that story, Remembrance of the Daleks didn't sound like that. It's just, as Dick Mills from the Radiophonic Workshop said to me under intense questioning from me at a convention, I said, you know, about why do the Daleks sometimes sound different? He eventually said, oh, we never write the setting down. So I think every time they went to do the Daleks, they kind of went, oh, yeah, that's it, that'll do, that's fine. That sounds pretty much like it. Whereas, of course, I've written it all down. So the Daleks sounded, well, I say they've sounded the same since 2005. The funny thing is, even though you use the same setting, such is the odd relationship between, you know, the analog technology of the ring modulator and the microphone and the mixer and the delivery of the voice, that it always sounds slightly different. You know, no two Dalek sessions are exactly the same. No matter how precisely you set it up, there's always some random factor in the mix, like the gain's slightly higher, or I'm slightly closer to the microphone, or slightly further away, or whatever, and they always sound ever so slightly, only if you're a total nerd like me, different.
Yeah. So let's take a step away from the Daleks for a minute. I'm sure we'll get back to them, but let's
don't forget the Benji and Nick show every Sunday.
Yes. Yeah, let's take a step away from all that, and let's come on to Sherlock Holmes, because you're also, apart from being an avid player of Doctor Who, you're also an avid player of Sherlock Holmes, on the stage even, in fact. Do you want to give some origin to that, perhaps?
Oh, yeah.
If you can remember.
Yeah, I can. I mean, I'm quite old, but not that old yet. In 1999... a friend of mine got in touch with a friend of his who was doing a fringe production at the Drayton Court Theatre, I think it was called, which is just a little theatre venue under a pub in London. He was doing a production of The Speckled Band, which was which was Arthur Conan Doyle's adaptation of his story, The Speckled Band, his Sherlock Holmes short story. And they said they were looking for someone to play Sherlock Holmes. And this chap, who turned out to be Ken Bentley, who now works for Big Finish as a director, see the connection there, got me in to do this show. It was an interesting show to be in, and it was the first time I'd played Sherlock Holmes. And it always appealed to me to play Sherlock Holmes. I've been a bit of a low-level fan of Sherlock Holmes, not a great reader of the stories, but let's face it, he's a little bit like Doctor Who, isn't he? So then quite a few years later, the thriller series I used to do at Nottingham Theatre Royal decided to do a Sherlock Holmes play, which was Brian Clemens's script called Holmes and the Ripper. And the producer had a mind to cast someone else, but then Maggie Stables, who, if you're a Big Finish fan, you'll know her name, the late great Maggie Stables, was an actor in the season and a good friend of the producer of the thriller season at the Theatre Royal Nottingham, said, "Oh, come on! If you're casting from your group of actors who you know, you've got to get Nick Briggs to be Sherlock Holmes. So thanks to Maggie, I got to be Sherlock Holmes in Holmes and the Ripper, which was a fantastic experience. And I very nearly, a while ago, did a national tour of that, but it just... it was going to be a very limited length national tour, which I liked because I could fit it in around my Big Finish work. But then the bookings got too successful. I was flattered by the producer. He said, now I've told people you're playing it, that I've got more bookings. And then I had to pull out, unfortunately, because I just couldn't manage all those performances. And then I also did another touring Holmes show. But anyway, in amongst all this, I spoke to Brian Clemens, now sadly departed, but he at the time, he came to see Holmes and the Ripper because he always made a point of seeing any production of his plays if he possibly could. And because, Brian was a famous writer of thrillers and the Avengers and stuff like that. So he's got lots of plays he's written. And, I mentioned to him, I said, would it be all right if I work for a company called Big Finish? I'd love to get the rights to do your play as an audio drama. And he just said, oh, yeah, that's absolutely fine, yeah. And I said, obviously, my people will speak to your people. And he went, no, that's it. I'm saying so now. It's fine, yeah. So, we did a little deal, and that was all great. And that started us off doing home stuff for Big Finish. And then latterly, we got a brilliant writer called Jonathan Barnes involved, and he's become really the sole writer of the range. And I'm about to, in March, go into studio with 6 new hour-long episodes, I think. So we're doing a load. But that's done very nicely for us, actually, and it's always a thrill to play the part alongside Richard Earle, who plays Dr. Watson, who just is Dr. Watson. I think I'm the first Sherlock Holmes who cast as Dr. Watson. I cast him and said, no, this is the guy. He's from another century. He should be the guy to do it. The brilliant thing for me about doing Sherlock Holmes for Big Finish is that it helps me appreciate how difficult the job is for the doctors, because it gives me sporadic experience of being the leading man and being the focus of everything in terms of the acting, and you realize just how tiring that is and how much responsibility is on your shoulders. So it always gives me a reminder to be extra sympathetic towards the doctors.
So it's one thing I did want to ask, and bring this back to Doctor Who again. Obviously,
Yes.
when, at least when I'm following my research anyway, if I'm correct, whenever script readings happened, you would bring the modulator with you and you would do the voice. One thing I was curious
quite
is,
often. Yeah.
the first time you did that, did you tell anyone, or did you just turn up and go, you know what, I've got my stuff, I'm doing it now?
Well, Russell T Davies phoned me up after I'd got the job on Dalek, just to chat about things. And then he said, would it be all right if the director phoned up, and Joe Ahern? And I said, yeah, sure. Because normally, directors and what have you are meant to speak via agents, but, and it's okay for directors to speak to actors as long as it's been cleared. So Joe Ahern phoned up and he said, so you've got the thing. He said, I've heard your Dalek voices. They sound great. Russell had obviously given him his copy of Jubilee or something. And he said, but, we'd love you to come to the read-through. And I wonder, could you? And I said, what, bring the ring modulator and a speaker with me? And he went, yeah, can you bring that? Because I said, well, I sound pretty silly without it, so I'll find a way of making that work. Of course, I had to buy myself a portable speaker to attach to a mixer and the ring modulator. So, people think you turn up with something the size of a mobile phone and just talk into it and the voice comes out. Although there is an app that does that, I believe. Although it records it and plays it out, doesn't it? I don't know whether that's still available, folks. But so when the I think it was the second assistant phoned me up and said, I hear you're bringing some equipment to the read-through. What is it you're bringing? And I said, well, basically, I need 3 electrical sockets by my chair. And I went, okay. So when I got there, there was the extension lead and everything. And, of course, all the other actors, Christopher Eccleston and Billy Piper weren't there at this point. All the other actors are looking at me peculiarly as I start setting all this stuff up and plugging things in, getting a microphone out and everything.
Yes.
And it was a wonderful moment that I'm always telling people about, that I looked around at the other actors as they look at me and I said, haven't you brought yours? And they sort of, what? Anyway, it was all set up, and Chris and Billy were filming pickups where they were having all sorts of problems with the timings of the episodes, and they kept I may be wrong about the detail here, but I think they were being ultra careful about not having the scripts too long so that the episodes wouldn't run too long. So they were cutting the scripts back, but then they were finding when they filmed it and the rough cuts were being put together that the episodes were underrunning. So they kept having to, reinstate or write new scenes and go off and shoot bits here and there. So while, Billy and Chris had been scheduled to do the read through, but they were doing some pickup shots. There's like at the end of the world, there's the scene between Billy and the blue lady from the the plumber sort of person. That was entirely a scene put in later to extend the. I mean, it's a beautiful scene actually. It works beautifully to extend the length of the episode. Anyway, so I don't know what scenes they were filming, but we kept getting news that they were delayed and delayed and delayed, and it was getting to a point where everyone really had to go home. Because we were going to miss the last train back from Cardiff, which leaves at an extraordinarily early time. I think the last train from Cardiff to London back in those normal days was about 8 o'clock. So, if you didn't get it, you were stuck in Cardiff. And it was sort of getting to the point of being like 5 or 6 o'clock, and you think there's an hour's episode and whatever. And so they eventually chose two of the people who were playing really, really small parts, who only had like one line each, to play the Doctor and Rose. They were absolutely thrilled, and it was almost literally the case that they were just drawing breath to start reading that episode, and suddenly the doors burst open, and Chris and Billy came in, like the Doctor and Rose dashed in, just went, "Oh, hello, everyone," and sat down, had no time to really be introduced to anyone. So this is the answer to your question. Finally, of course, everyone else knew I had this thing, but no one had heard it. But Chris and Billy didn't even know that I had something there, or didn't know what I was doing. And I was very gratified the other day that when we were working with Chris on the Big Finish audio stuff, he told the story and said, he hadn't even seen me. And then when suddenly the voice started, it completely took him by surprise and blew his mind. I mean, the whole room erupted into massive applause, which was wonderful for me. And Chris I remember him stopping and saying, "Hold on, I wasn't ready for that," and then having to go back again to do that bit. I think the first thing I did was just the Dalek screaming when that guy was drilling a hole in it. I think that's the first thing you hear from a Dalek in the episode. Yeah. So yeah, it was a huge shock for everyone, but a delightful one, because everyone culturally has that link to the Dalek voice. Everyone remembers Dalek voices. And I've said this a million times before, but there was one person, and I keep forgetting her name, but she's a very tall, statuesque woman who played Van Statten's assistant. And I look around the room, as all good actors do when they're being applauded, to see how much you're being appreciated. And everyone was applauding except for her. And she looked like she'd been caught at a Nazi rally, you know what I mean? And she was looking around like, what is going on? Why are all these people going on? And I thought, there's someone who's never seen Doctor Who before. And she didn't. She'd never seen it, bless her. And in one of the scenes, when Van Statten is backing away, I don't know whether you remember it, and in the foreground, Van Statten's backing away and the Daleks going closer and closer to him, and he's looking more and more scared. She's in the background. And when we did the first take, she just sort of regarded the action, and then Joe Ahern said to her, "Could you look a bit more scared?" And she pointed to the Dalek and said, "What, of that?" And then he turned to her very firmly but politely said, "It's been killing people." And she went, "Oh yeah." And then she was perfect, but she had, most people, if you've experienced Doctor Who in your life, especially as a kid, and you see a Dalek, you kind of go, "Oh wow, it's a bit scary. Oh, it's Doctor Who." It's like the Dalek. It's like a contract with kids, isn't it? It's like putting a sheet over you and going, "Woo, I'm a ghost." There's something about the Dalek that says, "I am meant to be scary," even if it isn't intrinsically terrifying. Everyone knows, it moves in a strange way. It speaks with a strange voice. Yeah, it's meant to be scary. But she didn't have that connection at all. Interesting, isn't it?
Was that Goddard? I forget her character's name.
Yeah, I think it was Goddard, wasn't it?
Yeah, I forget the actress's name. I think
Was it
it's
Anna Louise someone? Was that?
Yeah,
her
I
name?
think so. I'm terribly sorry if she's listening, but
Yeah, she's an
because she
avid
does
listener to your
listen.
podcast. Did you know that? I don't know whether
Yes.
she listens to the Benji and Nick show, which is available every Sunday from nicholasbriggs.com or all your favourite podcast providers.
Yes. Well, let's go on to the Cybermen now for a minute.
Okay, yes.
Because obviously you do, as well as voicing the Daleks, you mentioned you voice other Doctor Who sort of aliens, and
Yes.
obviously the Cybermen are included. Cybermen and the Jadoon and the Ice Warriors, Icemen.
Yes. Ice Warriors, yes.
Ice Warriors, yeah, that's them. How did that come about? How did you go from everything else just being the go-to alien voice guy? How did that sort of happen?
Well, yeah, it's weird, isn't it? I'm not quite sure how it happened. I mean, I think I got the Cyberman gig because I'd done the Daleks, and then someone had found out that Roy Skelton had done the Daleks previously, and he also did some Cyberman voices. I think this sort of myth built up that whoever does the Dalek voices also does the Cyberman voices.
Mm-hmm.
And which of course is a myth, really. Well, Peter Hawkins did do cyber voices for the Moon Base and Tomb of the Cybermen and Wheel in Space, he says, revealing his slightly disturbing encyclopedic knowledge of Doctor Who. Partially encyclopedic. I'm not that knowledgeable. So, and certainly David Tennant was who I knew anyway. I knew him from being in Big Finish before he was on the television show, and knew him sort of socially. He was assuming it as well, and I think in a couple of phone conversations he said, "Oh, when are you coming down?" And I said, "What for?" He said, "Well, you know the Cybermen." And I said, "Yeah, why aren't you coming to do the voices?" And I said, "Well, I presume so." And then I think Graeme Harper, who was the director, he phoned me, and they said they wanted me to do it anyway. And he phoned me and asked me what I was going to do for the Cyberman voice, and he kept saying. He said, I don't want it to be like Darth Vader, but, maybe a bit like Darth Vader, but not Darth Vader. That's what he had in mind, you see. And I sent him clips of all the different types of Cyberman voices that I had done for Big Finish. And he didn't realise that I'd done them. So he reacted to them as though they'd been done by someone else. And I remember the sort of sing-songy 10th Planet voice that I did. That one that speaks like this. And blah, blah, that Roy Skelton had done back in the day. He said, "We can't have those. They sound like Ken Clark," he said. He was a prominent politician at the time. So I said, "Okay." He said, "Yeah, those were rubbish, those." I was saying, it was me doing it, but never mind, Graeme. So he was talking about it, and then Russell phoned me up, and he started doing impersonations of Tomb of the Cyber. He's going, sort of sound like this. He said it should sound like he was doing all that, and I went, "Oh right." And he said, "I'll see you very soon in Cardiff." I said, "Well, I presume so." He said, "Well, hold on, what do you mean by that?" And I said, "Well, no one's booked me to do this job. No one's told my agent." And he said, "Right," he said, "I'm going to kick some ass." And put the phone down. And then 5 minutes later, my agent phoned me and said, "I don't know what you've said, Briggsy, but blimey, you've just had a massive booking come through." And I think that Russell had phoned. I said, "What do you mean you haven't booked Nick Briggs? He's meant to be doing the voices and we want him on set doing them." Who knows? He probably didn't say that. I'm just dramatising. So they booked me for every single scene that had Cybermen in. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. They're not in it they don't speak that much. But they'd panicked, you see. And then over the next few days, the dates were modified where they realised that, that's a scene where the Cybermen, they are in it, but they don't say anything, But it was, and then it coincided with a block that had Daleks in as well. So that I felt like I'd moved to Cardiff during that period, I don't know how long I was there, but it felt like a very long time. I got very used to the inside of that hotel. I'm very used to Cardiff and just wandering around. I seem to have a lot of spare time. These days, they're much more precise in their bookings. They work out exactly what you're needed for, and you go there and you work the whole time for a short amount of time, and you come home. Whereas in those days, it's like they sort of got you there, and then every morning you get a call from the first assistant, or the second assistant rather, who deals with these things, sort of say, it turns out we won't need you today, Nick, or we might be on standby. We might want you about 7 o'clock this evening, but I'll let you know a couple of hours before. But, go and do some shopping or go to the cinema or something, So, or have a nice swim. There's a nice swimming pool at that hotel, It was great fun.
So I'm going to ask a quick one here.
Okay.
Has there
Is
been...
this yes or no?
Close. Has there... It includes a classic Who as well. This isn't just modern. But, if there was a Doctor Who villain but you could have voiced, is there anyone that sticks out of, what, I would really like to do that one?
Well, it's not a voice. Well, it involves a voice, but I'd really love to have played the Master. I can't think of a particular voice. I think I get to voice all the ones I want to do. I think I might have even done a Sontaran voice from time to time. But I wouldn't like to. I mean, I wouldn't like to be in the series playing something in some... There was talk when we were doing the Cybermen that there was talk about me being in a cyber suit and speaking the lines from the cyber suit. But it turned out they modelled the costumes on Paul Casey, who was their lead, their hero monster actor. He was always the main guy. And Paul was a physically brilliant, agile, resilient person, could stand a lot of punishment. But he was quite slight and quite and shorter than me. If you notice, when the Cybermen in the olden days used to be really tall, that was the main requisite for the Cybermen. Well, now they're not tall at all. What they tend to do is shoot them from below to make them look tall, but they're actually quite slight and small, the Cybermen. They don't look that way on screen particularly, but they are in reality. So ultimately, they seemed to decide not to put me in a suit because the mould, I wouldn't have fitted in it. But, when I turned up to the shoot and I saw these guys leaning against things and panting, it was freezing cold, I remember, but they were really hot and they were outside and they were panting. It was like seeing horses panting in cold weather. There was so much sort of steam rising from them, and they were, and I just thought, oh my God, I dodged a bullet there, And I thought of something that my mother had said to me when I once auditioned to be the 118 man. The 118 adverts?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the guys with the moustaches and the wigs who would, for a phone service. Well, one of them broke his collarbone or something, so they had to audition for a new one. I think they've been through several of them now. And I did this very strenuous audition where I had to run around the room and jump up and down and then say 118 at the end of it or whatever. And but I remember telling my mother I was going for the audition, and she said, "Oh, Nick, that's a job for a young man." Of course, I was in my early 40s at this point, very early 40s, and I suddenly thought, God, it's got to that stage, and I looked at those guys in their cyber suits, and I just thought, yeah, I'm too old to do that kind of gig now. You can't. Maybe 5 years ago, I would have thought, yeah, put me in a stupid suit and a mask, I'll do that. But I thought, yeah, now I've got to the point where actually people would look at me getting into it and thinking, isn't that a bit cruel? Put that old man in that suit. Anyway, yes, but I would like to play the Master. That's who I'd like to play. Roger Delgado style. I mean, I've got the beard.
Yeah. Well, actually, it wasn't... obviously... your consideration about getting into a Cyberman suit, but you did have a live-action cameo role in Torchwood, if you can remember.
Of course I can remember.
In the Children of the Earth sort of trilogy or four episodeology. You played Rick Yates in that, which I thought was...
A 4-episodeology, yeah.
Yes.
Didn't they call it for the Aliens box set? Didn't they call it a quadrilogy or something?
Yeah, something like that. But still, that was quite... well, I think... Torchwood was definitely something that that sort of took off from Doctor Who. And your involvement in that, even in a small role, was very cool to see. So,
well, I mean, it was lovely to do. And Russell was at great pains to point out to me that I got the job fair and square. He said we could have just given it to you, but they got me to audition, and other, and he phoned me up and said, he said, you got this job because you were terrifying in that audition. You were absolutely terrifying, and you were brilliant, and you got it on your own merits. I said, God, the other guy must have been rubbish.
Yeah.
But no, so that was great to do. And one of the loveliest things about that job was that I met Peter Capaldi on it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And I remember being on that location, which, funnily enough, that room that we had that was meant to be the sort of conference room at number 10, the cabinet room at number 10 Downing Street, was actually the same place that had been in the Cyberman episode. So I knew I was very familiar with the location. It felt like coming home. And I remember walking across that room, and Peter was, I think he was sort of like by the window or something. And I walked over. I thought, oh, Peter Capaldi, he's an actor who I think is brilliant. I must go and introduce myself to him. Because I think in a few of the scenes, I'm sitting next to him. And as I got halfway across the room, he turned around and looked at me, and I started to raise my hand and said, oh, now, Peter. And he said, you've no need to introduce yourself to me, Nicholas Briggs, the voice of the Daleks. Oh, my God. And greeted me like he was my biggest fan, which is typically generous of Peter. That was so lovely of him to do that. It made me feel like an absolute $1 million. And then for the next few bits, we were taken to and from the location in the same car, and we nattered a lot, and we joked around on set talking about Doctor Who all the time. We just gossiped about Doctor Who all the time, and were giggling away. And I think I was told to stop giggling, even though Peter was giggling as well, but he was too important to be told to stop giggling. So you know what I mean? Only the unimportant people get told off. And I remember one of my best experiences on that was sitting next to him, having just giggled and messed around and talked about Genesis of the Daleks or whatever it was we were talking about. And then, they go for a take, and you just see that transformation in Peter, from him being Peter to suddenly becoming that rather haunted, sad character in that Children of Earth episode. And when I heard that Stephen Moffat had got Peter round to audition in his living room to play the Doctor, and they said, it was once we saw him audition, he had to have the part. And I thought, that thing at being at close quarters with Peter Capaldi when he transforms into a character, it's quite a special moment, actually, and I could see absolutely why they gave him the part. Yeah.
But let's go back to, again, with Peter Capaldi. You were one of the sort of few actors to be with every single era. You mentioned how you sort of transfer from era to era with each different Doctor, from showrunner to showrunner. How would you sort of feel like the portrayal of the characters you sort of played has perhaps changed along with those different eras that you've been with?
Well, it's really to do with there are two factors really. It's the scripts and the directors, and the script demands whatever performance of you, and then it's a question of how you work with the director. The way, and to be slightly controversial, here you go, the way directors react to me varies from treating me as though I'm just a bloke who's come on set to put a fuse in a plug, to being a valued member of the cast. And it really, and none of on the fitting the fuse in the plug thing. I think that some directors, because they see me with a pair of headphones and I sit next to the sound man, they think I'm a technician. I actually had one member of the cast in one of the stories say, "Are you an actor?" I said, "No, I'm the blooming caretaker. What do you think I am?" And he went, all right, keep your hair on. I said, "Well, blimey, I'm acting in this scene, aren't I?" And he was it seemed like an odd question to ask me when I was providing a character voice for a scene. And I think some directors are a bit like that. And it's like, it's this weird guy doing a weird voice, and I don't know what to say to him. He'll just do his thing, on cue, which of course I do. And that's all fine. But there are other directors who just absolutely, have you in on the process. And really, by many thanks to Nick Pegg and Barnaby Edwards, who are the lead Dalek operators, they've evolved this way. I think it might have been Barney in particular, evolved this way of rehearsing on set, where they move around and I move around behind them, providing the voice. I used to provide the voice from the side, but a lot of older actors tended to talk to me when they should have been looking at Barney, when he's just moving around in the Dalek suit. So, or Dalek prop. So working that way, it does involve me with the rest of the cast. But I would particularly highlight Rachel Talalay and Hetty MacDonald as my favourite directors, because they were both extremely. I mean, there have been loads of other brilliant directors as well. Joe Ahern was great too. Who involved me very much in the whole character interaction thing. Hetty, bless her, would after we'd say done a rehearsal of a scene, would come rushing round the back of the set and say, "Just say that line you were saying as the Supreme there. Just say it again." And I'd say it, and she'd go, "What is it you're thinking?" And I don't think anyone else had ever asked me anything like that about a Dalek. And I'd say, "Well, he's thinking X, Y, Z." And she goes, "See, I don't think it is that. I think he thinks blah, blah, blah." And I go, "Oh, yeah, so more like..." And she, "That's it, isn't it? That's it. Brilliant. Let's do it again." And that, it's absolutely joyful. A lot of people just hear the Dalek voice and think, it's just a noise. It doesn't matter. It's just ba, 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 ba. Whereas I think that's very typical of Hetty to... the precision with which she approached everything. I particularly loved the way whenever she was directing a scene, she would shoot it to fit in with the actors rather than make the actors fit in around her shots. Generally on television, you see, they set up a shot and they say to the actor, "Oh, can you just cheat it to the left? I know you weren't there in the other shot, but it looks better that way." I didn't see Hetty ever do that. She always, if the actor was in a particular position, she'd just go over and talk to the camera operator and just indicate to him, maybe just come down here. Yeah, that's it. So, and there's a lot of that with Rachel. I mean, both of them actually. I don't know what the significance of it that they're both women. I don't know what significance that has, but both of them involved me in everything a lot more than all the others had, really. Hetty wanted to show me, or saw that I was interested in some storyboarding she'd had done for the big action sequences, and she said, "Come and have a look. Look, it's this rather beautiful drawings they've done." And we had a chat about it. And Rachel always liked to watch the action on a little screen with a kind of material black cloth round it to shade the screen from any reflections. And she would beckon me over to come in and have a look at the shot, which I thought was extraordinarily generous of her. I mean, she once got me to set to say 2 lines when I could have done it in post-production. She said, "Well, Nick, I bet you're wondering what the hell you're doing here." And I went, "Oh, no, not at all." She said, "Oh, come off it." She said, "They gave me the option of having you here." So I thought, yes, I'll have you here. So, yeah, it does vary the way you get treated on Doctor Who, really. But one way or another, you always feel a hugely important part of it, which is lovely.
Yeah, and so we often like to end our episodes of The Real Show with a weekly a recommendation to the listener. And we thought, we've had you on, special guest, we thought we'd give you the power of the weekly recommendation. So what would you like to recommend to the listener to go out and find? It's
so difficult to narrow down. I mean, I would have, about a week ago, I would have recommended Iron Fist, because about the first 5 episodes of it on Netflix are really good, but then it really goes off.
Yeah.
So forget that. What else have I been loving? I tell you what, someone recommended to me a weird Russian science fiction film called Sputnik. And you have to watch it with subtitles on Netflix. And it's rather like a Russian take on the Quatermass experiment.
Yeah.
It's really quite horrible. You have to have a strong stomach, and that's not my kind of thing. But it's great sci-fi, and it is ultimately fairly unsatisfying. But the journey's quite good. It's a fascinating piece of science fiction. That's my recommendation.
Wow. Okay. Sputnik. It is. So thank you very much for coming and speaking with us today.
And don't forget the Benji and Nick show every Sunday.
One more time. I was hoping one more time.
What are we talking about next time? Well, we're talking about a comedy called Three's Company, which is hilariously bad. We've just been talking about Quatermass and the Pit, the movie. So anyway, they're all the editions of the podcast are available. And you can write in at podcast@nicholasbriggs.com. So please do come and join us.
Excellent.
Oh, you
Do
can
you
go on
want-
Patreon as well. Patreon. Yeah,
Yes,
Patreon.com.
support
Type in the
us.
Benji and Nick Show, and you can subscribe to us at various levels and get all sorts of fun extra material.
Wonderful. It's been a joy to have you. Absolute
Well,
pleasure.
Likewise.
Thank you very much.
I hope I haven't, my answers have been very long, but it has at least filled up your program.
Yes, thank you very much, Nick.
Pleasure.